Marcus Chun thought he'd seen everything in 30 years of fixing starships in the Outer Rim. Drunk pirates, suicidal smugglers, and aliens who paid in currencies that didn't exist anymore. But nothing prepared him for the day a dying creature crawled into his workshop, bleeding silver onto his floor. He should have called the authorities, should have minded his own business. Instead, he did what humans do best. He helped a stranger, expecting nothing in return. 5 years later, when the hegemony's war fleets darkened Earth's sky and humanity faced extinction, Marcus would discover that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo across the galaxy in ways no one could imagine. Sometimes they come back with claws, fangs, and enough firepower to crack a moon. The universe was about to learn why you never mess with a species crazy enough to adopt every stray that crosses their path. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of Marcus Chin's workshop like bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before sliding down the rust-streaked walls. The storm had been going for 3 days now, turning the already muddy streets of Haven Station into rivers of brown sludge that could swallow a hoverbike whole. Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, and glanced at the chronometer mounted above his workbench. 2,200 hours. Way past closing time, but the ion drive sitting in pieces on his table wouldn't fix itself. Haven Station wasn't much to look at. A collection of prefab buildings and converted cargo containers clinging to the edge of civilized space like barnacles on a ship's hull. Most folks who ended up here were running from something. Marcus was no different. He'd been running for 8 years now, ever since the incident on Kepler Prime. The incident that cost him his engineering license, his career, and nearly his life. But out here in the ass end of nowhere, nobody asked questions. They just needed their ships fixed, their drives tuned, and their life support systems working well enough to make it to the next port. Marcus was good at fixing things. Always had been. It was people he had trouble with. The sound that interrupted his work wasn't part of the storm. It was softer, more deliberate, like something dragging itself across concrete. Marcus paused, socket wrench in hand, and listened. There was again a scraping sound, followed by what might have been a whimper. Probably just another drunk spacer, he muttered, but something made him set down his tools and walk to the workshop's main door. He'd reinforced it years ago with salvaged hull plating after a particularly unpleasant encounter with some Orion pirates who thought his prices were too high. The peephole he'd installed gave him a fisheye view of the alley outside. At first, he saw nothing but rain and shadows. Then movement caught his eye, something white against the dark ground, dragging itself toward his door like a broken ghost. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Whatever it was small, maybe the size of a large cat, and it was leaving a trail of something dark behind it. Blood. Marcus's first instinct was to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Haven Station had a strict policy about minding your own business. People who stuck their noses where they didn't belong tended to disappear, usually in pieces. But as he watched, the creature collapsed, its movement stopping entirely. In the pale light from the street lamp, he could see it more clearly now. Definitely feline in shape, but wrong somehow. The proportions were off, and its fur was pure white, so white it seemed to glow in the darkness. The smart thing to do was to go back to his workbench, finish the ion drive, and let nature take its course. Marcus Chun had survived 8 years on Haven Station by being smart. Instead, he found himself disabling the door's locks and stepping into the rain. The creature was unconscious when he reached it, its breathing shallow and rapid. Up close, Marcus could see the extent of its injuries. 3 parallel gashes ran along its left side, deep enough to expose muscle and something that might have been bone. The wounds were clean, surgical almost. This wasn't the result of an accident or a fight with another animal. Someone had done this deliberately. Marcus had seen his share of alien species during his years as a starship engineer. The galaxy was full of them. Centaurians with their blue-scaled skin, the insectoid Vex with their compound eyes, the towering Goliaths who could crush a human skull with their bare hands. But He'd never seen anything like this creature. Its skull was elongated, almost wolf-like, but the ears were wrong. They swept back from its head like wings, and, even unconscious, he could see the intelligence in its features. The rain was soaking through his coveralls, and the creature's breathing was getting weaker. Marcus made a decision he would question for the rest of his life. He scooped the injured animal into his arms and carried it inside. His workshop had a small medical kit in the back room, left over from his days working the corporate ships. Marcus had always been good with his hands, whether he was rebuilding a plasma coupling or stitching up a cut. He laid the creature on a clean work towel and began to assess the damage under the harsh light of his work lamps. The wounds were worse than they'd looked outside. Whatever had cut this creature had been trying to kill it, not just hurt it. The gashes went deep, and one of them had nicked what Marcus assumed was a major artery. Silver blood pooled on the towel, far too much for something this small to lose and survive. "Okay, little guy," Marcus whispered as he prepped the medical kit. "Let's see if human medicine works on whatever you are." The creature's eyes opened as he began cleaning the wounds. They were large, golden, and filled with an intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't just an animal. Whatever this thing was, it was aware, possibly even sentient. It watched him work with those unsettling eyes, never flinching even when he had to dig debris from the deepest wound. Marcus worked in silence, his movements careful and precise. The biofoam from his medical kit seemed to work well enough, sealing the wounds and stopping the bleeding. He administered a broad-spectrum painkiller, hoping the dosage wouldn't be too much for the creature system. Then he wrapped the injuries in sterile bandages and sat back to observe his patient. The creature's breathing had steadied, and its eyes had closed again. Marcus found himself studying its features more carefully. The bone structure was wrong for any feline species he knew of. The limbs were too long, the digits too dexterous. And that fur wasn't just white, it was translucent like fiber optic cable. Under his work lights, he could swear he saw patterns moving beneath the surface, like data streams flowing through a network. "What the hell are you?" he whispered. As if in response, the creature opened its eyes again and fixed him with that golden stare. For a moment, Marcus felt something brush against the edges of his mind, soft and tentative, like a question being asked in a language he couldn't understand. Then, the sensation was gone, and the creature closed its eyes once more. Marcus spent the next 3 days nursing his unexpected patient back to health. He fashioned a bed from spare blankets in the corner of his workshop, set up a space heater to keep the creature warm, and tried to figure out what it might eat. Water it accepted readily enough, lapping it from a shallow dish with a tongue that was just a bit too long and too flexible. Food was more complicated. The protein bars from his emergency rations got a sniff and a dismissive look. Synthetic meat from the station's market earned the same response. It was only when Marcus offered it a piece of actual earth-grown chicken, a luxury he'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, that the creature showed real interest. By the 4th day, it was moving around the workshop, investigating his tools and equipment with the careful curiosity of a cat, but with movements that were far too purposeful. It seemed particularly interested in his computer terminal, spending long minutes staring at the scrolling diagnostic data with those unsettling eyes. Marcus tried to tell himself it was just an animal, maybe some kind of exotic pet that had escaped from a passing trader. But animals didn't move like this thing did. Animals didn't watch him work with such obvious understanding. And animals definitely didn't purr in harmonics that made his equipment hum in response. On the 5th day, the creature was gone. Marcus discovered the empty bed when he opened the shop that morning. He searched the workshop, checked every corner and hiding spot, but found nothing. The creature had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving only a few white hairs on the blankets and the memory of those golden eyes. He told himself he was relieved. Having an unknown alien species in his workshop was asking for trouble, especially on a station where the wrong question could get you spaced. But as the days passed and his routine returned to normal, Marcus found himself missing the creature's presence. The workshop felt empty without those curious eyes watching him work. Life on Haven Station continued. Ships came and went, their crews looking for cheap repairs, and no questions asked. Marcus fixed their drives, patched their hulls, and took their credits without getting involved in their business. It was safer that way. Smarter. But sometimes late at night, when he was working alone, he thought he caught a glimpse of white fur in his peripheral vision. Sometimes he heard that strange, harmonic purring echoing from the shadows. And sometimes, when he was debugging a particularly stubborn system, he would find problems solved in ways he couldn't remember implementing. Marcus told himself it was his imagination, stress, and isolation playing tricks on his mind. But deep down, he suspected his unusual patient hadn't gone very far at all. 3 months after the creature's disappearance, the first hegemony scouts arrived. They came in sleek black ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their hulls marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The station's administrator, a nervous Centaurian named Kex, gathered all the residents in the main hangar to meet with the newcomers. The hegemony representatives were humanoid, but clearly not human. They were tall, pale, and moved with the fluid grace of predators. Their leader, who introduced himself as Commander Thex, spoke in perfect standard, but with an accent that made every word sound like a threat. "Citizens of Haven Station," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the hangar. "The hegemony has designated this system for resource extraction. You have 72 hours to evacuate." The crowd erupted in protests and questions, but Commander Thex raised a hand for silence. "This is not a negotiation. This sector contains materials essential to the hegemony's expansion. Your presence here is inconvenient." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Resource extraction was hegemony speak for strip mining. They would tear apart every planet, every moon, every asteroid until nothing remained but empty space and stellar debris. And anyone who got in their way would be eliminated. "What about our homes?" asked Kex, his blue scales darkening with stress. "Our businesses? Some of us have been here for decades." Commander Thex smiled, an expression that looked like it had been carved from ice. "The hegemony is not unsympathetic to your plight. Transport ships will be provided to relocate you to designated settlement zones." Settlement zones. Marcus had heard about those. Overcrowded prison camps where refugees were worked to death in hegemony factories. If you were lucky. And if we refused to leave? The question came from Jake Morrison, who ran the station's bar. Jake was ex-military, tough as nails, and not easily intimidated. Commander Thex's smile widened. "Then, you will be removed by force. The hegemony's patience is not infinite." The meeting broke up in chaos, with residents arguing among themselves about what to do. Some wanted to fight, others to flee, and a few delusional souls thought they could somehow negotiate with the hegemony. Marcus slipped away from the crowd and made his way back to his workshop, his mind racing. 72 hours. That wasn't enough time to pack up his entire operation, let alone find somewhere else to go. And even if he could, where would he run to? The hegemony was expanding in all directions, swallowing system after system in their relentless march across the galaxy. Soon there would be nowhere left to hide. He was staring at his workbench, wondering if it was worth trying to salvage his most expensive tools, when he heard it. A soft sound that was part purr, part harmonic vibration. Marcus turned slowly, his heart pounding. The creature stood in the doorway, but it wasn't the same injured animal he had nursed back to health months ago. This version was larger, sleeker, its white fur somehow more vibrant. But the eyes were the same, those golden, intelligent eyes that seemed to look straight through him. "Hello there," Marcus said softly, not wanting to scare it away again. The creature tilted its head and stepped into the workshop. As it moved into the light, Marcus could see new details. The patterns beneath its fur were more pronounced now, flowing like circuits of living light. Its limbs had an almost mechanical precision to their movement, and When it opened its mouth, he caught a glimpse of teeth that were definitely not natural. It approached his workbench and placed one paw on the surface. Where it touched, Marcus's tools began to glow with the same soft light that moved beneath the creature's fur. His computer terminal flickered to life, displaying data streams he had never seen before. Schematics flowed across the screen. Ship designs, weapon configurations, defensive systems that were decades ahead of anything he had ever encountered. The creature looked at him with those golden eyes, and Marcus heard a voice in his head, clear as his own thoughts, but definitely not his own. "You saved my life, Marcus Chun. Now I will save yours." Marcus blinked, certain he was hallucinating. "You can talk. Not talk. Communicate. Your species calls it telepathy, though that is a crude approximation of the process." "What are you?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. The creature's mental voice carried what might have been amusement. "I am what your people would call a sentinel. My species has watched yours for some time. We find you interesting." "Watched us? For how long?" "Since you first stepped beyond your home world. Your species possesses a quality that is rare among the starfaring races. You help. Without expectation of reward, without consideration of personal cost, you extend aid to those who need it." Marcus thought about the night he had found this creature bleeding in the rain. "I couldn't just let you die." "Precisely. This quality has earned you allies you do not know you possess. The hegemony believes humans are weak because you show mercy. They do not understand that mercy requires far more strength than cruelty." The creature moved to his computer terminal, and the screen filled with new information. Star charts, fleet positions, tactical analyses. The hegemony plans to attack your home world within the solar cycle. They believe humanity will surrender rather than fight a war they cannot win. Marcus felt sick. Will they? Surrender, I mean? Your leaders will try to negotiate. Your military will attempt a conventional defense. Both will fail. The creature's golden eyes fixed on him again. But there's another way. Your species has something the hegemony does not expect. Friends willing to even old debts. The workshop filled with a soft, harmonious sound that raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms. Outside, he could see lights appearing in the darkness, ships materializing from nothing, their hulls the same translucent white as the creature's fur. They were beautiful and terrible, clearly built for war, but somehow elegant in their deadliness. "Who are you people?" Marcus breathed. "We are the Sentinels. We guard the spaces between the stars and protect species that show promise. Your people saved one of our cubs, an exile who had been left to die by her own pride for the crime of being different." The creature's mental voice carried a note of what might have been sadness. "In saving her, you earned a debt that can only be repaid in kind." Marcus watched the alien ships take positions around Haven Station. Each one was easily the size of a battle cruiser, but they moved with the grace of fighters. "You're going to fight the hegemony? We're going to remind them why some species are better left alone. The hegemony believes in strength through domination. They're about to learn about strength through unity." The first hegemony ship exploded without warning, its hull cracking open like an egg to spill atmosphere and debris into the void. The remaining scouts tried to retreat, but the Sentinel ships were faster. Within minutes, the entire hegemony flotilla was nothing but expanding clouds of plasma and metal. That was just the beginning, the creature told him. The real war starts when they reach Earth. Marcus stared at the tactical display floating above his workbench, his coffee growing cold as he tried to process what he was seeing. The holographic representation of local space looked like a three-dimensional game board, with colored dots representing ships, stations, and planetary bodies. Red dots marked hegemony forces, blue represented human vessels, and brilliant white showed the Sentinel fleet that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. The numbers were staggering. The hegemony had assembled over 3,000 warships for their assault on human space. Everything from fast attack craft to massive dreadnoughts the size of small moons. The human defense fleet, hastily assembled from whatever Earth's various factions could scrape together, numbered barely 400 vessels. Most of those were converted civilian ships with hastily mounted weapons and armor that wouldn't stop a determined meteor. The Sentinel force was different. Only 57 ships showed on the display, but Marcus was beginning to understand that counting Sentinel vessels was like counting ocean waves. Each ship seemed to exist in a state of controlled transformation, their hulls shifting and flowing like liquid metal, weapons emerging from nothing only to disappear again when not needed. Your military leaders are requesting a meeting. The creature, who had finally introduced herself as Lyra, told him. They wished to coordinate strategy. Marcus almost laughed. I'm just a mechanic. Nobody in the Earth Defense Force is going to listen to me. Lyra's golden eyes regarded him with what might have been amusement. You underestimate your importance. Marcus Chun, you're the human who first made contact with our species. In our culture, that makes you our liaison is perhaps the closest translation. Great, Marcus muttered. No pressure. 3 hours later, he found himself aboard the Sentinel flagship, a vessel so large it could have housed the entire population of Haven Station with room to spare. The corridors were organic in design, walls flowing in smooth curves that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The air tasted of ozone and something else he couldn't identify, something that made his skin tingle with potential energy. Lyra padded beside him as they made their way to what she called the command nexus. She had grown again since their reunion, now standing nearly as tall as Marcus's waist. The patterns beneath her fur were more complex too, forming intricate geometric designs that hurt to look at directly. How is this possible? Marcus asked as they walked. A few months ago you were barely alive, small enough to fit in my hands. Now you're... He gestured helplessly. Sentinels are not born as your species understands the term. We are compiled, assembled from base matter, and programmed with genetic templates that allow for rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Marcus stopped walking. You're artificial. Lyra's mental voice carried a note of something that might have been offense. Is a human artificial because they are grown from genetic code? We are as real as you, Marcus Chun. Perhaps more so, since we can modify ourselves to meet the needs of any situation. The command nexus was a vast spherical chamber at the heart of the ship, its walls transparent to reveal the star field beyond. Floating in the center of the space was a construct that defied easy description. Part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. Tendrils of light connected it to various points around the chamber, and Marcus could feel his teeth ache from the electromagnetic fields it generated. 3 figures waited for them near the center of the chamber. 2 were human. Admiral Sarah Park of the Earth Defense Force and Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's chief xenologist. The 3rd figure made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. It was another Sentinel, but where Lyra was sleek and feline, this one was something else entirely. It stood nearly 3 meters tall on digitigrade legs, its body covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. Its head was elongated, almost draconic, with eyes that burned like tiny stars. When it moved, reality seemed to ripple around it. This is Zephyr, Lyra explained. He commands our forces in this sector. Admiral Park stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious stress lines around her eyes. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of bearing that came from years of military service. Mr. Chun, I'm told you're the reason we have allies in this fight. Marcus glanced at Lyra, then back at the Admiral. I just helped an injured animal. I had no idea that the injured animal belonged to one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Dr. Vasquez interrupted. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. The Sentinels have been classified as a level 5 civilization for over a century. We've had exactly 3 confirmed contacts with their species in all of human history, and none of them were particularly illuminating. Zephyr's mental voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder. Your people ask many questions, but listen poorly to the answers. We prefer to observe rather than interfere. Then, why interfere now? Admiral Park asked, Zephyr's star-bright eyes fixed on Marcus. Because one of your species showed our child mercy when mercy was neither expected nor required. In our culture, such an act creates a bond that transcends species lines. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward eagerly. What can you tell us about your capabilities? Your technology level? We need to understand what we're working with if we're going to coordinate our efforts. Marcus felt Lyra's amusement through their mental link. Your scientist wishes to understand forces that her species will not discover for another 1,000 years. It would be like explaining stellar engineering to a primitive human who has just learned to make fire. I heard that, Dr. Vasquez said dryly, and I'd still like to try. Zephyr gestured to the construct floating in the center of the chamber. This is a tactical nexus, capable of processing probability matrices across multiple dimensional states. It can calculate the outcome of battles before they begin, account for variables that your mathematics cannot even describe. The construct pulsed, and the space around it filled with holographic displays showing fleet movements, weapon trajectories, and what looked like branching probability trees. Marcus could see the hegemony fleet approaching the outer edge of human space, a red tide of destruction moving toward Earth at near light speed. Their strategy is efficient, Zephyr continued. They will strike your outer colonies first, forcing your fleet to spread thin, attempting to defend them all. When your forces are committed, they will punch through your weakest point and drive straight for Earth. Admiral Park studied the display grimly. How long do we have? 67 hours until they reach Titan Colony. 112 hours until they breach Earth's defense perimeter. And our chances of stopping them with conventional tactics. The construct pulsed again, and new displays appeared. Marcus didn't need to understand the mathematical formulas to recognize the overwhelming red that dominated every scenario. Less than 1% probability of human victory, Zephyr stated matter-of-factly. What about with your help? Admiral Park asked. Victory becomes probable, but not certain. The hegemony has learned to adapt their tactics since encountering us in previous conflicts. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Previous conflicts? How long has this war been going on? Lyra's mental voice carried the weight of vast sadness. The hegemony has been expanding for over 2,000 years, Marcus chunned. They consume civilizations the way a fire consumes wood, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. We have fought them for half that time, whenever they threaten a species we have chosen to protect. And how many species have you saved? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat. What can you tell us about hegemony technology? Their weapons, their ships, their tactics. Zephyr waved a clawed hand, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed schematics of hegemony vessels. Marcus whistled softly at what he saw. The ships were massive, angular constructs that looked more like geometric theorems than traditional spacecraft. Their hulls were covered in strange protrusions that might have been weapons or sensors or something else entirely. Hegemony technology is based on principles your species would call dark science, Zephyr explained. They manipulate forces that exist in the spaces between particles, drawing power from the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. That's impossible, Dr. Vasquez protested. The energy requirements alone would require technology your species will not develop for millennia, Zephyr agreed. This is why conventional tactics fail against them. Your weapons fire particles and energy through normal space. There's fire through dimensions your science cannot detect. Admiral Park studied the schematics with the eye of a career military officer. Are there weaknesses we can exploit? Their strength is also their greatest vulnerability. Hegemony technology requires absolute stability in the quantum field around their ships. Introduce sufficient chaos into that field, and their systems become unreliable. Marcus found himself leaning forward. What kind of chaos? Lyra's mental voice carried a note of what might have been pride. The kind that your species excels at creating. Humans are unpredictable. Your tactics are often so irrational that even our probability matrices struggle to account for them. You want us to be chaotic? Admiral Park asked. We want you to be yourselves, Zephyr replied. The hegemony expects logical responses to their aggression. They have fought hundreds of species over the centuries, and all have followed predictable patterns. Attack where you are expected to defend. Defend where you are expected to attack. Above all, refuse to accept the rules of engagement they try to impose. Marcus thought about his years as a starship engineer, dealing with systems that refused to follow their design specifications, and crews that solved problems in ways that would horrify their manufacturers. You want us to improvise? Precisely. Your species has a talent for making functional solutions from dysfunctional components. This confuses the hegemony greatly. The next several hours were spent in detailed planning sessions that made Marcus's head spin. Fleet positions, supply lines, communication protocols, contingency plans for scenarios he couldn't even pronounce. The Sentinels had technology that seemed like magic, but they planned like engineers, accounting for every variable they could identify. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The human fleet would be divided into 3 forces. The largest would take up defensive positions around Earth, broadcasting every frequency they could manage to make it seem like humanity's entire military was concentrated there. The second force would be dispatched to defend the outer colonies, following standard military doctrine to make the hegemony think they understood human strategy. The third force, the smallest but potentially most important, would be given Sentinel technology upgrades and sent on what appeared to be a desperate suicide mission against the hegemony's main fleet. Their real purpose would be to get close enough to deploy quantum disruptors provided by the Sentinels, devices that would introduce the kind of chaos into local space that would cripple hegemony technology. It's insane, Admiral Park said when the briefing was complete. If the quantum disruptors don't work, that third force will be completely destroyed. If the quantum disruptors don't work, Earth will be completely destroyed, Dr. Vasquez pointed out pragmatically. Marcus studied the tactical display, watching the probability trees branch and shift as variables were adjusted. Something nagged at him, a detail that didn't quite fit. What happens if this works? If we stop the hegemony here? Zephyr's star-bright eyes regarded him steadily. Then, humanity will have earned the attention of forces far greater than the hegemony. Victory in this conflict will mark your species as one capable of resisting what others consider inevitable. That will make you either a valuable ally or a dangerous threat to civilizations across the galaxy. And which will we be? Lyra's mental voice carried warmth that reminded Marcus of her time in his workshop. That depends on whether you remain the species that saves injured strangers without thought of reward. The universe has need of such people, Marcus Chun. Perhaps now more than ever. As the meeting broke up and the human representatives prepared to return to their commands, Marcus found himself alone with Lyra in one of the ship's observation decks. Through the transparent walls, he could see the Sentinel fleet making final preparations for battle. Ships that had looked like works of art were transforming into instruments of war, their elegant lines becoming sharp and predatory. You're scared, Marcus observed, sensing her emotional state through their mental link. Terrified, Lyra confirmed. This battle will determine the fate of your species. If we fail, humanity will join the list of civilizations consumed by the hegemony's endless hunger. Marcus thought about Haven Station, about the small community of refugees and outcasts who had made lives for themselves on the edge of nowhere. He thought about Earth, the blue marble hanging in space that he hadn't seen in nearly a decade, but still called home. Why did you really come back? He asked. I mean, I appreciate the whole debt of honor thing, but you barely knew me. We spent, 5 days together? Lyra's golden eyes reflected the starlight streaming through the observation deck. Because in those 5 days, you showed me what it meant to be cared for without condition. My own pride cast me out for being different, for being born with fur that marked me as genetically aberrant. I was prepared to die alone in that alley. But you didn't. No. Instead, a stranger from a species I had only observed from a distance chose to save my life. Not because he expected reward, not because he was ordered to, but because it was the right thing to do. That lesson is worth fighting for. Marcus nodded, understanding finally why the Sentinels had come. This wasn't about repaying a debt or honoring an ancient code. This was about preserving something rare and precious. The idea that mercy could exist without ulterior motive, that kindness could flourish without expectation of return. "Will it be enough?" he asked. Lyra's mental voice carried a note of grim determination. "Ask me again in 60 hours. Outside, the last of the Sentinel ships finished their transformation from things of beauty to instruments of war. Soon, they would carry Marcus's simple act of kindness into battle against an enemy that had devoured worlds. The mechanic who had saved a dying creature in a rain-soaked alley was about to discover just how far the ripples of compassion could spread across the galaxy. The first shots of what historians would later call the Soul Defense War were fired at 1427 Greenwich Standard Time, when Hegemony Scout ships opened fire on the mining platforms around Titan. Marcus watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Sentinel flagship, feeling helplessly disconnected from events happening hundreds of millions of kilometers away. The holographic display showed the outer system as a three-dimensional map dotted with moving lights. Blue icons represented human forces, mining ships, patrol craft, and the hastily armed freighters that made up humanity's first line of defense. Red markers swarmed toward them like angry insects. Hegemony attacked craft that moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind. Titan Defense Command is requesting immediate reinforcement. Admiral Park's voice crackled through the communication array. She was aboard the battleship Valkyrie, leading the human fleet's second group toward the outer colonies. "They're taking heavy casualties." Marcus could see why. The blue icons around Titan were winking out one by one as hegemony weapons found their targets. Human ships exploded in brief flares of light before their debris scattered into the void, taking their crews with them. Each lost icon represented dozens of lives. People who had gotten up that morning never expecting to die in battle against an alien empire they had never heard of. Pattern analysis confirms hegemony doctrine, Zephyr reported from his position at the tactical nexus. They're committing 30% of their total force to the outer system engagement, forcing human commanders to believe this is the primary assault. Lyra padded across the bridge to where Marcus stood, her movements now carrying an almost mechanical precision. The patterns beneath her fur had grown more complex since the battle began, resembling circuit diagrams more than organic markings. When she spoke, her mental voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in his bones. The real attack will come within the hour. 3 hegemony battle groups are already moving toward Earth's defense perimeter, using the gravity wells of Jupiter and Mars to mask their approach. Marcus studied the tactical display, trying to make sense of movements that operated according to principles he didn't understand. "Where's our third group?" "The suicide mission." "Positioning themselves for quantum disruptor deployment," Zephyr answered. "Captain Rodriguez is proving to be an excellent choice for this operation." Maria Rodriguez had volunteered to lead the smallest human force on what everyone privately acknowledged was a one-way mission. 12 ships, half of them converted civilian vessels, equipped with experimental Sentinel technology that might or might not work against hegemony defenses. She was a veteran of the Proxima conflict, known for tactical innovations that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "There," Lyra said, highlighting a section of space near Mars. Hegemony stealth ships are beginning their approach runs. Marcus felt his stomach clench as new red icons appeared on the display, materializing from nothing like digital ghosts. The hegemony ships were massive, their angular hulls bristling with weapons systems that glowed with malevolent energy. Just looking at them made his eyes water, as if they existed in too many dimensions for human perception to properly process. "Admiral Park, be advised that hegemony main force is beginning final approach," Zephyr transmitted on the human command frequency. "Estimated arrival at Earth defense perimeter in 47 minutes. Understood. All units, this is Admiral Park. Execute Gambit Protocol on my mark. Marcus watched as the human fleet began implementing their desperate strategy. Ships that had been moving toward the outer colonies suddenly reversed course, abandoning the defenders around Titan to race back toward Earth. It was a calculated gamble. Sacrifice the outer system to concentrate maximum force around humanity's homeworld. The hegemony commanders took the bait. Satisfied that human forces were behaving predictably, they accelerated their attack on the outer colonies while their main force continued its stealthy approach to Earth. It was exactly what the Sentinels had predicted, but knowing that didn't make it any easier to watch human ships die to maintain the illusion. Titan Defense Command has fallen silent, reported the communications officer aboard the Valkyrie. Marcus closed his eyes, trying not to think about the thousands of people who had just become casualties in a war they hadn't chosen. When he opened them again, Lyra was watching him with those golden eyes that seemed to see everything. "This is what war means," she told him gently. "Not just the battles we win, but the prices we pay for victory. Your species is learning this lesson faster than most. Does it ever get easier? No. The day it becomes easy is the day you become like the hegemony." The tactical display updated as Earth's defenders detected the approaching stealth ships. Alarms began sounding across the human fleet as sensors picked up energy signatures that shouldn't exist, weapons systems that operated outside known physics. The hegemony had dropped their concealment, confident that they were close enough to overwhelm Earth's defenses. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Park. Weapons free. Repeat, weapons free. Give them hell." The Battle of Earth began with a light show that was visible from Luna. Human ships opened fire with everything they had: particle beams, nuclear torpedoes, kinetic projectiles that could punch through a mountain. The space around Earth lit up like a fireworks display as hundreds of weapons discharged simultaneously. The hegemony ships responded with weapons that bent the laws of physics. Dark energy beams that seemed to devour light itself. Quantum torpedoes that exploded in dimensions Marcus couldn't name, and something that looked like controlled black holes launched from their main guns. Marcus watched in horror as human ships simply ceased to exist, not destroyed so much as edited out of reality. The carrier Indomitable vanished between 1 second and the next, leaving only a sphere of twisted space-time where it had been. The destroyer Achilles fired a full spread of nuclear torpedoes, only to have them transformed into flowers that bloomed briefly in vacuum before withering away. "This is impossible," Marcus breathed. "How do you fight an enemy that can rewrite physics?" "You changed the rules," Zephyr replied calmly. "Captain Rodriguez, you are cleared for disruptor deployment." On the tactical display, the 12 ships of the human suicide squadron were revealed for the first time, having approached the hegemony fleet under full stealth. They were right in the middle of the enemy formation, close enough to see the intricate details of alien hull designs. "This is Captain Rodriguez. Disruptors are armed and ready. It's been an honor serving with you all." Marcus held his breath as 12 small devices were ejected from the human ships and began moving toward their targets. The quantum disruptors looked like nothing more than metal spheres the size of basketballs, but, according to Zephyr, each one contained technology that could destabilize local space-time. The hegemony fleet noticed the approaching devices and tried to destroy them with their exotic weapons. Dark energy beams lashed out, quantum torpedoes detonated, and reality itself seemed to twist as alien technology tried to eliminate the threat. But the disruptors had been designed by a species that understood chaos theory at a quantum level, and they adapted to each attack, phasing in and out of normal space like metallic ghosts. The first disruptor reached its target, a hegemony dreadnought the size of Manhattan. The device merged with the alien ship's hull and promptly exploded, but not in any way Marcus could understand. Instead of fire and debris, there was simply wrongness. Space around the dreadnought began behaving according to different rules, probability waves colliding and interfering with each other until cause and effect became meaningless. The alien ship tried to fire its main weapons, only to have the energy beams emerge backward through time and strike its own past position. Its navigation system attempted to plot a course to Earth and instead opened a portal to what looked like the inside of a star. When it tried to communicate with other ships in its fleet, its messages emerged as mathematical equations that reconfigured nearby asteroids into sculptures of theoretical geometry. Disruptor 1 successful, Captain Rodriguez reported, her voice tight with amazement. Target is experiencing technical difficulties. The other disruptors found their targets in rapid succession, and the hegemony fleet began experiencing the kind of technical failures that would give engineers nightmares. Ships that tried to maneuver found themselves traveling through their own past trajectories, creating temporal loops that trapped them in recursive motion. Weapons systems began firing on their own fleet as targeting computers interpreted friendly signals as hostile ones. One massive battlecruiser attempted to deploy fighter craft and instead launched a swarm of origami cranes that immediately began evolving into sentient poetry. "What did you do to them?" Marcus asked, watching the chaos unfold with a mixture of awe and terror. "We introduced uncertainty into a system designed to operate with absolute predictability," Lyra explained. Hegemony technology works by imposing order on quantum mechanics, forcing particles to behave according to predetermined parameters. The disruptors simply suggest alternatives. The effect spread through the hegemony fleet like a virus of irrationality. Ships that had operated with machine-like precision suddenly found themselves subject to quantum effects that made their sophisticated technology useless. Navigation systems began plotting courses to philosophical destinations. Weapons computers started composing musical scores instead of calculating firing solutions. Life support systems attempted to breathe in colors. But the hegemony had been fighting wars for 2,000 years, and they adapted quickly. The ships at the edge of the chaos zone began implementing emergency protocols, physically cutting themselves off from the quantum disruption by jettisoning entire sections of their vessels. They lost significant combat capability in the process, but they remained functional. "They're learning to compensate," Zephyr observed. "Estimated time until full tactical effectiveness returns, 37 minutes. Admiral Park's voice crackled through the communications array. "All units, this is our window. Hit them while they're down." The human fleet charged into the disrupted hegemony formation like ancient cavalry attacking a broken line. Ships that had been hopelessly outclassed minutes before now found themselves facing enemies that couldn't reliably target them. The destroyer Thermopylae rammed a hegemony cruiser whose navigation computer was convinced it was actually a sandwich. The frigate Crazy Horse engaged 3 enemy fighters whose weapons were firing bouquets of temporal paradoxes. Marcus watched as Captain Rodriguez led her surviving ships. Only 7 remained, in a desperate attack on the hegemony command vessel. It was a pyramid-shaped monstrosity the size of a small city, its hull covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Even affected by the quantum disruption, it was still a formidable enemy. "This is Rodriguez, making our attack run on the command ship. If this doesn't work..." "It will work," Lyra interrupted, her mental voice carrying absolute certainty. "Your species has a talent for making impossible things happen through sheer, stubborn determination." The human attack force opened fire on the hegemony command ship with everything they had left. Nuclear warheads detonated against alien armor. Particle beams carved through exotic matter, and kinetic projectiles punched holes in hull sections that shouldn't have been able to exist. The pyramid began to list as its systems struggled with quantum effects that turned structural integrity into a philosophical question. But the biggest blow came from an unexpected source. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Kim, an engineer aboard the destroyer Athens, had been monitoring the quantum disruption effects and noticed something the tactical computers had missed. The hegemony ships weren't just experiencing technical failures. Their entire technological base was beginning to unlearn itself. All ships, this is CPO Kim aboard the Athens. The disruption is spreading through their computer networks. If we can maintain pressure for another 15 minutes, their entire fleet will forget how to function. It was the kind of insight that could only come from someone who spent their career making broken systems work. The quantum disruptors hadn't just introduced chaos. They had created a cascade failure that was propagating through the enemy's interconnected systems like a digital amnesia plague. The next 15 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. He watched as human ships sacrificed themselves to maintain the attack, ramming enemy vessels to prevent them from escaping the disruption field. The carrier Yorktown deployed its entire fighter complement in a suicide run to take out hegemony communication arrays. The cruiser Defiant used its main engines as weapons, diving into an enemy battleship and detonating its fusion reactor. When it was over, the hegemony fleet hung dead in space, their magnificent technology reduced to inert metal by its own inability to remember how it was supposed to work. Ships the size of cities drifted helplessly, their crews trapped aboard vessels that no longer understood basic concepts like air recycling or gravity generation. This is Admiral Park to all human vessels. Ceasefire. Repeat, ceasefire. We've won. The words echoed through the communication network, but nobody seemed able to believe them. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been defeated by a combination of Sentinel technology and human ingenuity, proving that sometimes the best way to fight an impossible enemy was to make the battle impossible for them to understand. Marcus slumped against a bulkhead, emotionally exhausted by what he had witnessed. Is it over? Really over? Zephyr's star-bright eyes regarded him thoughtfully. This battle is over. The war, that remains to be seen. The hegemony will analyze this defeat and adapt their strategies accordingly. But today, humanity has proven itself capable of standing against forces that others consider inevitable. Lyra pressed against Marcus's side, her warmth a comforting reminder that the alliance between their species was built on more than military necessity. Today, my friend, your people showed the galaxy what we learned in that workshop on Haven Station, that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the fate of worlds. As the human fleet began rescue operations for the crews of disabled hegemony ships, because that's what humans did, even with enemies who had tried to destroy them, Marcus realized that the real victory wasn't military. It was the proof that compassion could survive even the darkest conflicts, that mercy remained possible even in the depths of interstellar war. The mechanic who had saved an injured stranger in a rain-soaked alley had helped save his entire species. But more importantly, he had helped preserve the idea that being human meant more than just surviving. It meant choosing to care for others, no matter the cost. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Marcus Chun found himself sitting in a place he never imagined he'd see, the chambers of the Galactic Council on Andromeda Station. The massive space habitat rotated slowly against the backdrop of the galaxy's edge, its gleaming spires housing representatives from over 200 species. Most of them were there to witness something unprecedented, the formal induction of humanity into the galactic community as a protected species under Sentinel guardianship. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. A species that had been marked for extinction was now being welcomed into the most exclusive club in the galaxy, all because a mechanic had once shown kindness to a dying creature in the rain. "You look uncomfortable," Lyra observed from her position beside his chair. She had grown again since Earth's liberation, now standing nearly as tall as Marcus himself. The patterns beneath her fur had evolved into something resembling living circuitry, and when she moved, reality seemed to shimmer around her edges. "I'm a grease monkey from Haven Station," Marcus replied, tugging at the formal diplomatic uniform Admiral Park had insisted he wear. "I fix broken engines and patch hull breaches. I don't belong in a place like this." Lyra's mental voice carried warm amusement. "Yet here you are, about to be recognized as the first human ambassador to the Sentinel Collective. Destiny, it seems, cares little for what we think we deserve. The Grand Chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, its walls composed of what looked like crystallized music that resonated with harmonious frequencies. Representatives from dozens of species filled the amphitheater-style seating, their forms ranging from the familiar humanoid to the utterly alien. Marcus spotted the insectoid Vex delegation, their compound eyes glittering like jewels in the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Near them sat the Goliaths, their massive forms requiring specially reinforced seating. At the center of the chamber stood the arbitration platform, where Zephyr waited alongside 3 other Sentinel representatives. Marcus still had trouble looking directly at them for extended periods. Their forms seemed to exist in too many dimensions simultaneously, creating optical effects that made his eyes water. Citizens of the galactic community, Zephyr's mental voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrices. We gather today to formally recognize the species known as humanity as members of our collective defense treaty. A ripple of what might have been surprise passed through the assembled representatives. Humans have been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years, and they were still considered a primitive species by most standards. To be offered Sentinel protection usually required millennia of cultural development and technological advancement. Admiral Park stood from her seat in the human delegation area. She had recovered from the injuries sustained during the Battle of Earth, though Marcus could see the fine line stress had etched around her eyes. On behalf of all humanity, we are honored by this recognition. We pledge to uphold the principles of the Sentinel Collective and to defend those who cannot defend themselves. It was a pretty speech, carefully crafted by Earth's diplomatic corps. But Marcus knew the real reason humanity was here had nothing to do with formal treaties or military alliances. It was about a moment of compassion in a dark alley, and the bonds such moments could create across the vast distances between stars. The ceremony proceeded with the elaborate ritual that galactic politics seemed to require. Ancient words were spoken in languages that predated most civilizations. Formal documents were exchanged and authenticated with quantum signatures that couldn't be forged. Marcus found his mind wandering as speaker after speaker praised humanity's potential and the wisdom of the Sentinel decision. It wasn't until Ambassador Thex took the platform that Marcus's attention snapped back to the proceedings. The former hegemony commander had been among the survivors of the Battle of Earth, one of thousands of enemy personnel who had been rescued by human ships after their own vessels became technological ghosts. His pale features were as composed as ever, but Marcus could see something different in his eyes, a crack in the absolute certainty that had once defined his species. I speak today not as a representative of the hegemony. Thex began, his words carrying through the translation matrix with crystalline clarity, but as an observer of something the hegemony has never encountered in 2 millennia of expansion. The chamber fell silent. Hegemony survivors have been granted asylum on various worlds throughout human space, but none had spoken publicly about their experiences. For 2,000 years, my people have conquered through superior technology and absolute ruthlessness. We believed that mercy was weakness, that compassion was inefficiency. We viewed other species as resources to be consumed or obstacles to be eliminated. Thex paused, his pale eyes finding Marcus in the human delegation. Then, we encountered a species that rescued the crews of ships that had come to destroy their world. Humans who risked their lives to save enemies who had shown them no mercy. It was incomprehensible. Marcus felt hundreds of alien eyes turning toward him, but he kept his gaze fixed on Thex. The former hegemony commander continued speaking, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've studied human history during my time in exile. Your species has fought countless wars, committed terrible atrocities, and created suffering beyond measure. Yet you also possess something the hegemony has never understood, the capacity for redemption. You can choose to be better than your nature demands. Dr. Vasquez stood from the scientific observer section, her gray hair gleaming under the chamber's lights. Ambassador Thex, Are you saying the hegemony wishes to sue for peace? I'm saying that some of us have begun to question whether conquest is the only path to survival. Perhaps. Thex hesitated, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. Perhaps there are lessons to be learned from a species that saves dying strangers without thought of reward. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives from dozens of species processed this unexpected development. The hegemony had never shown any interest in negotiation, never demonstrated anything but absolute hostility toward other forms of life. For one of their own to speak of learning from their enemies was unprecedented. Zephyr raised a clawed hand for silence. The Sentinel Collective acknowledges the words of former Commander Thex. The path to redemption is long and difficult, but it remains open to all species willing to walk it. As the formal ceremony resumed, Marcus found himself thinking about the unexpected consequences of simple compassion. He had saved one injured creature in an alley, and that act had somehow created ripples that were still spreading across the galaxy. First, the Sentinels had come to humanity's aid. Then, the hegemony had been forced to confront the reality of mercy, and now other species were beginning to reconsider their own approaches to conflict. The universe is changing, Lyra observed, her mental voice carrying notes of wonder and uncertainty. Your species has introduced variables that our probability matrices cannot fully account for. Compassion, it seems, is more powerful than we calculated. The ceremony concluded with the formal signing of the Protection Accord, a document that guaranteed humanity's place in the galactic community and established a framework for their partnership with the Sentinel Collective. Marcus found himself standing beside Zephyr as representatives from dozens of species approached to offer their congratulations and, in many cases, to request similar protection agreements. "This is what you have accomplished," Zephyr told him as they watched the diplomatic machinery grind into motion. "Not just the salvation of your species, but the beginning of something new, a different way of thinking about survival and cooperation among the stars." Marcus shook his head in bewilderment. "All I did was help an injured animal. I never intended for any of this to happen." "Intent and outcome are not always connected," Lyra added, padding over to join the conversation. "Sometimes the smallest actions create the largest changes. Your species calls it the butterfly effect, the idea that tiny perturbations can reshape entire systems." As the chamber began to empty and delegations made their way to various reception events, Marcus found himself approached by an unexpected visitor. Captain Rodriguez, still bearing the scars of the Battle of Earth, had been decorated as a hero of humanity and offered any position she wanted in the expanded Earth Defense Force. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from leading people through impossible situations. "Not just for what you did that night in the alley, but for showing us what humanity could be at its best." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did when people try to make him into something larger than life. "You're the one who led that suicide mission. You're the hero here." Rodriguez smiled, an expression that transformed her weathered features. "Heroes are made by circumstances, Mr. Chan. But the circumstances that created heroes out of all of us started with your choice to save a stranger's life. That makes you something more important than a hero. It makes you the reason heroes were possible." As Rodriguez moved on to rejoin her delegation, Marcus found himself alone with Lyra on the observation deck overlooking the Grand Chamber. Through the transparent walls, he could see the vast sweep of space beyond the station, stars scattered like diamonds against the cosmic darkness. "What happens now?" he asked. "The war's over, the treaties are signed, and humanity has its place in the galactic community. Where do we go from here?" Lyra's golden eyes reflected the starlight streaming through the observation windows. "Now comes the harder part. Maintaining peace is often more difficult than winning wars. Your species will face new challenges, political pressure from other civilizations, the temptation to use Sentinel technology for domination rather than protection, the risk of losing the very compassion that made this alliance possible." Marcus thought about Earth, about the billions of people who were just learning they weren't alone in the universe. How would humanity change now that they knew about the hegemony, the Sentinels, and the hundreds of other species that share the galaxy? Would they maintain the fundamental decency that had saved them, or would power and knowledge corrupt them as it had so many others? "Will you stay?" he asked. "On Earth, I mean. Help us navigate all of this." For a time, Lyra confirmed. "But eventually, my people will send me elsewhere. There are other species in need of protection, other worlds facing threats they cannot face alone. The Sentinel's duty is to the galaxy as a whole, not just to humanity. What about our friendship? Does that end when your assignment does?" Lyra's mental voice carried warmth that reminded Marcus of those first days in his workshop, when she had been small and injured and dependent on his care. "Friendship transcends duty, Marcus Chun. No matter where I go or what form I take, I will always remember the human who saved a dying stranger without thought of reward. That memory will guide me in ways you cannot imagine." A soft chime indicated that the reception was beginning in the main hall, where representatives from across the galaxy would mingle and begin the slow process of building new relationships. Marcus straightened his formal uniform one more time and prepared to fulfill his role as humanity's first ambassador to forces beyond their comprehension. "One more question," he said as they made their way toward the reception hall. "That night in the alley, when I found you, was it really an accident, or were you testing humanity somehow?" Lyra's response carried a note of amusement that somehow managed to convey both truth and mystery. "Does it matter? You made your choice based on what you believed was right, without knowledge of consequences or rewards. That choice would have been the same regardless of whether I was a dying animal or an alien observer." As they entered the reception hall, and Marcus was immediately surrounded by alien dignitaries eager to meet the human who had somehow changed the galaxy, he reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. From a failed engineer hiding on the rim of civilized space to the unlikely architect of humanity's place among the stars, it seemed impossible, but then again, impossible things had a way of happening when compassion was involved. Across the hall, he could see Admiral Park deep in conversation with Sentinel representatives about joint military exercises. Dr. Vasquez was surrounded by alien scientists eager to share knowledge with humanity's first sinologist. Captain Rodriguez was receiving congratulations from military commanders who had heard about her legendary tactical innovation. And in the center of it all, former hegemony personnel mingled with their former enemies, beginning the long process of learning to coexist with species they had once sought to destroy. It would take generations to fully heal the wounds created by 2 millennia of warfare, but the process had begun. Marcus thought about Haven Station, about the small community that had been his refuge for so many years. In a few days, he would return there to oversee its transformation into humanity's first diplomatic outpost. The collection of prefab buildings and converted cargo containers would become a meeting place where humans and aliens could work together to build something better than what had come before. It was a fitting role for a place that had always been a haven for those running from their past. Now it would become a place where entire species could run toward a better future. As the evening progressed, and Marcus found himself in conversation with beings he couldn't have imagined just months before, he realized that the real miracle wasn't the technology or the politics or even the military victory. It was the simple fact that compassion could survive and flourish even in the vast loneliness of space, creating bonds strong enough to change the galaxy itself. The mechanic who had saved a dying creature in a rain had learned that sometimes the smallest repairs could fix the largest problems. In a universe full of broken systems and damaged relationships, humanity's gift wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their willingness to help strangers, to show mercy to enemies, and to believe that even the most damaged things could be repaired with patience and care. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Marcus realized as he raised a glass of something that tasted like liquid starlight, was exactly what the universe needed. A species crazy enough to adopt every stray that crossed their path, compassionate enough to heal old wounds, and stubborn enough to believe that impossible things were just problems waiting for the right solution. In the end, that's what humanity brought to the stars, the unshakable belief that everyone and everything could be fixed if someone just cared enough to try.